Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. We're going to review a video called Leaving Islam After Promoting It for 15 Years by Abdullah Sameer. I actually debated his stooge friend called Abdullah Gondal. I'll put a hyperlink below this video. They're both atheists. They claim they were Muslim and they've left Islam, and how they're atheist skeptics and so forth. You can watch the video below how I debated this atheist, Abdullah Gondal, which his name is. It's not this guy here. This is Abdullah Sameer, his sidekick. And they both hang around on Facebook trying to put skepticism and doubts in the rest of the hearts of other Muslims. But you see, the problem is these people have got lame excuses. They've probably gone to, Wiki Islam, tried to look for information that puts doubts into Islam, but they haven't studied Islam well enough and gone into Islamic polemic work, because if they did go into deep Islamic polemic work, they'll be refuted. So what we'll do is we'll share some knowledge here, debunking their points and doubts, why they think they've left Islam. And of course, leaving Islam is something very popular. I mean, look at the views he's got, 703,000 views. If this person became a Muslim, would he get this many views? No, of course not. But as soon as someone leaves Islam, he apparently becomes a professional on Islam when he doesn't have a single academia on Islam. You know, you could study, you could be a Muslim for 15 years, no drop kick about it, just be an online apologist, promoting Islam, but then suddenly when you leave Islam, you become a scholar and a sheikh in Islam. Amazing. So let's go through his dubious, stupid points and then we'll refute it.
I started having a little bit of doubt here and there, small doubts. And eventually, I was at 2 years ago, I had some doubts. I was discussing with a friend online, and he mentioned that a lot of the stories in the Quran actually come from Jewish folktales. And I was very surprised about that, like Jewish folktales. I said, no, you mean it came from the Bible or the Hebrew Torah. And when I looked into it, I found out that actually a lot of the stories are from the Talmud, which is actually the Jewish commentary and the Jewish stories and basically the rabbis, commentary of the traditions. And so it doesn't really have a divine origin. And, I also had a big problem with the story of Dhul Qarnayn,
Okay, so we'll stop it really quickly there. If this person even studied or read the Quran properly, he will see that the Quran says specifically that we have sent the Quran as a reminder. And what does reminder mean? It reminds us some of the historical events, what took place in the time of Bani Israel. So if the Quran has stories of the Bani Israel, how does that become a fake book? How does it become a book that is not divinely from God? Allah is the same God that revealed the Torah and so forth to Moses. He has revealed the Injil to Jesus. So obviously, if Allah has been continuously inspiring scripture and books to those who came before us, of course the Quran is going to confirm some of those stories into its book. That's because it's from the same God, obviously. So how is that something, you could probably say, well, that's plagiarism. Well, how can Allah plagiarize himself if that is the same God? It makes no sense. So it's ridiculous for him to even assume that the Quran copies the folk tales of people of the past, when the Quran itself tells us that he reminds us some of the lessons and some of the examples that were taught in history. For example, when the Quran says Allah, he inspired Isa alayhi salam, where he taught him, how to heal, of course, by the permission of Allah, how, he raised the dead with the permission of Allah and so forth, how he healed birds by the permission of Allah, turned clay birds into, clay birds into real birds, living birds. This is all, some of these stories actually come from even the Gnostics of the Christian New Testament. Do we say because it comes from the Gnostics of the Christian New Testament, it is not authentic? Of course not. It could be authentic. We could just say that the Christians didn't add it to the canon of their Bible. They didn't think it was authentic. But does it mean just because the Christians didn't think it was authentic, Allah doesn't think it's authentic? Of course not. So stories in the past the true ones, whether it comes from the Gnostics, whether it comes from some of the Jewish sayings and so forth, Allah collects the ones which are true, which are authenticated through history, and He documents it in His final book. What's wrong with that? How does that even cast doubt in your heart? It's just ridiculous. Let's continue.
This tribe of how Dhul-Qarnayn, he trapped this tribe of people, Yajuj and Majuj, Gog and Magog, behind a giant gate built of copper and iron, and I was wondering, where is this place? How come we can't find it? We have Google Earth and all that, and how come we can't find it? So that was
this is so stupid. Allah says to us in the Quran that we have to believe. It's part of the 6 articles of faith. One of those pillars are that we have to believe in the unseen. So believing in Islam is believing in angels, believing in Allah, believing in the jinn, believing in Satan, obviously, believing in the books and so forth. So believing in the things that are unseen, right? And, for him to say, I accepted Islam, well, did you see Allah? So why did you accept Allah from the beginning if you think that you had doubts about Islam, about Dhul-Qarnayn? The first thing you should have had a doubt with is about God. Can you see God? No. You can't see God, right? But we use empirical evidence for the proof of God. So why didn't you just stop there? Why did it take you 15 years? If you had doubt, that should have been your first doubt and you should have left. Saying you came to the Quran, you practiced it for 15 years, and suddenly Dhul-Qarnayn just appeared in the verse of the Quran and you went, oh no, I need to doubt it because we can't find it on Google Earth. I think it was one of the Malaysian airliners. I forgot which plane it was. Was it MH17? I can't remember which one it was. But it's actually fallen in the ocean somewhere. I think somewhere between...
was another doubt. And actually...
So I think it was the Indian Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean, one of the two. It's fallen somewhere there. They've done so much Google search into it. They've done so much, they've literally sent ships after patrolling the oceans for months and months, and they couldn't even locate a huge plane. They can't. The debris of the plane, it could have had 1,000 different debris. They couldn't even find a single fragment of it. And then this guy wants to tell me, just because, Allah says there's Dhul-Qarnayn, he's somewhere hiding in some mountain, whatever, and Allah has preserved them there and so forth, and we can't locate him, therefore I'm now going to doubt my Islam. How ridiculous does that sound? So is this person saying that, for example, if Allah tomorrow willed that Dhul-Qarnayn comes out, the Yajuj and Magog, they come out of the cave and they're in front of us now, is this person going to say, oh, now I believe? This is why Allah says that these people have got munafiqun, hypocrisy in their hearts, that they want to see the signs of Allah right in front of them then and there, only to believe. It becomes like atheism, that they have to personally see with their own eyes in order to believe. No, we don't take this step in Islam. We believe in something called, putting our faith and our trust in Allah. Allah has shown us many, many miracles in the Quran, many signs in the Quran, many verses and lessons that He is the true God, and you've acknowledged He is the true God. The stuff that is from the unseen world, whether it's angels flying, whether it's the Prophet Muhammad ascending to heaven, whether it's heaven and hell, whether it's Satan, these are part of the unseen world. And that includes Yajuj and Majuj. They exist in the unseen world at this point of time, and Allah is going to reveal them. So that is part of the tenets of Islam. For you to say, well, I can't see it, therefore I'm going to be a disbeliever, is incoherent. They even use that in a scientific term. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You know, it's funny. It's like he's like, oh, I've got doubts about Dhul Qarnayn because we can't see them. Allah mentions it somewhere, you know, they're embedded somewhere in the earth. I can't see them. Therefore, this puts doubts in my heart. Hang on a minute. Is it absolute truth that have you yourself confirmed truly 100% they don't exist? Do you possess all of the information in the world? No, of course you don't. Have you looked at every corner of the earth? Are you sure that you've scaled every part of the earth? Has scientists themselves testified that they have discovered every part of the earth? No. So how did you come to the conclusion that, oh, it's put doubt in my heart because science has confirmed they've discovered every part of the earth and Dhul Qarnayn and his tribes and so forth don't exist, therefore I'm just going to now become a disbeliever? I mean, do you see how irrational, how incoherent their excuses are? Doesn't make sense.
Islam for good. I was in Ramadan, and I was at a pre-iftar halaqah, and the sheikh was saying, you know, Allah holds up the sky without any pillars, and this brought back all my doubts about, you know, if the Quran is truly from God, the creator of the universe, the one that knows all things, why is he describing the world in a way that, you know, was the 7th century understanding of the world? Like, the sky doesn't have, okay, we know the sky doesn't have any pillars that you can see, but there's no need for pillars. Like, we're just a ball in space. Sky is just emptiness. It's just emptiness of space. So there's no need for any pillars, visible or invisible. And, you know, there's many things like,
I mean, this is so pathetically silly. I mean, I really want to bang my head up against the wall. The Quran doesn't say that the earth has actually got pillars, or the heavens above, it's held by pillars. It doesn't say that. All it says, it doesn't have those things. Because back in the ancient times, if you even read through the biblical narrations, where some false scribes inserted into the Bible, that the earth is standing on pillars. Upon the pillars, the earth stands. So the Quran actually rejects this notion and clarifies some of the preconditioning of the falsified statements made in the past, and the Quran acknowledges those falsified statements, and he says that the Quran, that the earth itself does not have, or the heavens above is not built upon the pillars. So how is that even objectionable? You should turn around and say, well, yeah, that does prove the Quran to be the word of God, because it rejects some of those mythologies in the past. So when Abdullah Sameer says that the Quran is describing the world as understood in the 7th century, he's actually blatantly lying on the Quran. The Quran doesn't describe it as they thought. They believe that the earth has got pillars. The sheikh that he was quoting actually said that the earth, the heavens, it doesn't have any pillars. So why is he saying it describes it as the 7th century? I mean, really, I want to bang my head against the wall.
Understanding of the world. Like, the sky doesn't have, okay, we know the sky doesn't have any pillars that you can see, but there's no need for pillars. Like, we're just a ball in space. Sky is just emptiness.
Yeah, so where did the Quran even say that the sky has got pillars? I mean, first you need to establish where the Quran says it's got pillars, then you can accuse the Quran. But it doesn't say that. The Quran never, in fact, it speaks the total opposite. It says that the heavens does not have any pillars. So, I mean, seriously, one sec, I'm going to bang my head against the wall.
It's just emptiness of space. So there's no...
Your brain is emptiness of space.
Of the sun and the moon. Why Allah describes an orbit of the sun and the moon? Like, we know the orbit of the moon is around the earth. That makes sense. But the orbit of the sun? Like, what orbit would that be? You know, I looked into this and I found, well, there is an orbit. It's a 300 million year orbit of the sun around the Milky Way galaxy, which has nothing to do with humanity whatsoever, because it's completely useless. But of course, at that time, you know, the Muslims would have...
Well, where did the Quran say it's supposed to be part of humanity? And where did the Quran say it's, you know, I mean, where are you drawing these conclusions from, saying The Quran never said it had to be part of humanity. I mean, regardless whether it is part of humanity and it's not part of humanity, the fact that the Quran actually mentions Yasbahun, that the sun and the moon, they orbit and they spin on their own axis, I mean, how is that even objectionable to your criticism against the Quran?
They're taught that this orbit is an orbit of the sun around the earth, and even in a Sahih Hadith, Prophet Muhammad, he asked his companions, "Do you know where the sun goes when at the time of Maghrib?" And they said, "Allah knows best, and His Messenger knows best." And he said, "It goes beneath the throne of Allah." Now we know the sun is actually still there, and it's actually the earth that's going around the sun. So this one.
I'm sorry, but it doesn't say it goes under the throne of Allah. There's a metaphorical speech in the Quran that says that the sun actually, it prostrates under, the sun goes around, and then it's on the setting, it prostrates under the throne of Allah. I mean, the Quran is full of metaphorical speeches. There's even a saying in the Quran where it says that the trees and the stars, they prostrate in front of Allah. And the term prostrate here could mean is that they follow the law of Allah. So following the law means they are metaphorically prostrating to God because they are submitting to God's will. I mean, this is how your arguments can be refuted and debunked. I mean, for you to claim, these brings doubts into your mind, and just because you don't understand the Quran and Hadith, for you to then doubt the Quran and Hadith just because you haven't got the right answers, just because you haven't spoken to people who work in the apologetic field, this is absolutely nonsensical. And I really pity and feel sorry for you, honestly. For you to leave Islam because of these questions of the unseen, the sun prostrating Allah, these are all part of the unseen realms. Just because you can't prove it or disprove it doesn't mean you leave Islam automatically. Come on, seriously. So just because you have questions about the sun prostrating, how could that be reasonable? How can that make sense? This is in another existence. This is in front of Allah. There are many signs and lessons that happen in front of Allah, and we may not witness them. It doesn't mean that Islam isn't true, or these things don't exist, or these things don't happen. It's because your mind, the infallibility, it doesn't understand it because you have got limited knowledge and limited understanding of the world. Folks, I don't want to make this video a very long video. I'll put 3 hyperlinks below this video. It speaks about the rotation of the sun and the moon's orbit. You can go into detail and read all about this yourself. There are some critics out there who write articles who say that the sun and the moon, it's connected to the night and the day. How can this be scientifically accurate? Brother Frank at answeringchristianity.com, he actually refutes this in the whole article down there, as you can see. Shows that there are no connections between the two, and it's a misinformation, and you can read it for yourself. You can also read Islam Q&A. It speaks about the description of the prostration of the sun, and they go into some more details in there. You can educate yourself there. I'll post a hyperlink there too. There's also Live Science, which is a scientific article which talks about the sun's rotation on its axis. It takes about 24 hours for... it takes about 27 days for the sun rotates on its own axis once every 27 days. And so the Quran mentions that these celestial bodies are moving, they're rotating, they're spinning on its axis, they're even swimming in their own orbits and so forth. So, there's no contradiction here. He goes on to say, how can the creator of the universe make all of these mistakes? And this is the thing, you see. These guys, these skeptics, right, they run around to these scientific websites, right, and they say, oh, look, there's a particular part here in science that contradicts what the Quran says. But then they rely on science, right? But what they don't understand is science is ever changing. Science may make a statement one day and then it changes it the next day. So then he's like, oh, I'm skeptical because this part of science disagrees with the Quran, therefore I'm going to doubt the Quran. Well, science also affirms its position. So our position in Islam is we'll wait for science to recorrect itself. And it happens all the time. I mean, they used to believe that the sun was, for example, stationary. It was fixed. This is what the scientific community believed in at one point of time. And then, of course, the Quran says the sun rotates on its own axis and it's a moving celestial body. Now, if you were living back in that time, you'd say, oh, look, science contradicts the Quran. Therefore, I'm going to disbelieve in the Quran now. Well, Lord and behold, when we found out that through the sunspots, because the sun has these spots, and we found out that they rotate and they spin, well, guess what? Science reaffirmed its position and corrected itself. So do you say, oh, look, now I'm going to become a Muslim now? You see, this is why in Islam we hold a position, because we know that Allah is the one who has designed it all, so He'll know better than all, and science keeps reaffirming and correcting itself. So just because science has a contradiction against the Quran, I'm not going to turn around and sit there and say, oh, look, the Quran is false. No, I'm going to wait for science to reaffirm itself. And we see it happen so many times.
Volcanin, where is Gog and Magog, Yajuj and Majuj? There's supposed to be, millions and millions of them stuck behind this dam. We haven't found any giant gate anywhere in the world. I mean,
no, there is no source that says millions and millions and millions of them are stuck behind the dam. I think this ex-Muslim, again, is, drinking too much alcohol, dancing with the theories. He's not quoting any sources for his claim that millions and millions and millions of them are stuck behind the dam. No, I don't think it even says such a thing. But anyway, he'll just exaggerate, because this is what ex-Muslims do, right? They exaggerate about certain things.
And that the Quran is actually from God, like embryology and the mountains and all of these things, including the language, I found they just fell down flat. Like, for example, embryology, all you have to do is look into these things in detail to see how people misrepresent the Quran to be a scientific thing when actually it's not. These stories were meant to be like, kind of to bring you to remember God and to say, look how amazing. Amazing it is that the embryo, how it glows. It wasn't meant to be scientifically accurate. When you look into it, you find it's actually, the idea is flawed. And same thing with the stories in the Quran. Like, if they were true stories, why is it that we're finding trouble verifying these facts? I'll make another video about Dhul-Qarnayn in the future. It's a longer topic, but in summary, I just don't believe that there's any possibility that this actually came from a divine being, this book, the Quran. And when you look into it, you find many things that don't add up. And this is why I had to eventually leave Islam. Despite all the investment I put into it, emotional investment, and, my personality, my friends, everything was Islam to me. So this was a huge loss, losing God. And some people want to know what I believe now. I personally don't believe there's any God, so I'm atheist. But, if someone would ask, well, where did everything come from? I would say I'm still learning, and I don't think we have all the answers. But it is possible there is a force, outside of the universe. I don't know if you wouldn't call it necessarily God. You could call it God, but, a force, a power, a being that made everything into what it is. But this being, from what I can tell, either does not care about us or does not know about us, is not interested in us, doesn't answer dua, doesn't, like, if you just look at the state of the world today, all the suffering and all the pain, it does not look like there's any God out there that cares for us, that's looking out for us.
Okay, I'll put another hyperlink below this video and you can see it for yourself, where I discuss suffering and the argument of suffering. But it's interesting because he says, oh, look, you know, I've left Islam because there wasn't X, Y, and Z, these proof and evidences. We can't historically verify them and blah, blah, blah. But then he says, I've come to atheism. But then the question is asked to him, well, where did we come from? And how did we get here and things like that? And who created the world? He says, well, he doesn't really have an answer to that. So basically it seems like he's gone from Islam, which he claims it's got no answers, it's not from God, it hasn't got these proofs, it can't be historically verified, blah, blah. Then he jumps into atheism, and then in atheism he's like, oh, well, I can't, you know, we don't have the answers to where we came from and things like that. I mean, if you turned around and said, yes, we do have the answer in atheism, we know where we came from, we know how the world was created, and it didn't require God, and, you know, if he was certain about that, I'd say, okay, well, good on him. But he goes from one uncertainty to another uncertainty, and then he says, oh, look, you know, I left Islam because I had doubts and questions that aren't answered, but then he jumps into atheism, and in atheism, he has questions he can't even explain and understand. But just because he couldn't understand and explain things in Islam, he suddenly wants to leave it, but then jumps into atheism and says, well, I'm comfortable here, even though I don't have sufficient answers in atheism. Amazing, right? I mean, it's funny because he says, well, there is a possibility for some force existing outside this universe. He says, well, I wouldn't call it God. And then he turns around and says, well, I would call it God. He doesn't have a problem in calling it God. I mean, he can't even verify it. He can't even prove it exists, right? But he still entertains the idea it possibly could exist. But when it comes to the son prostrating to Allah, oh no, that's just not possible, right? Or when it comes to, you know, some, as he says, millions of men embedded in some earth, you know, in the crust of the earth somewhere, hiding somewhere where Allah has put them there. Oh no, we can't believe in that. But, you know, he entertains the idea that, oh, possibly a man out there, a God out there, whatever is out there, who is responsible as a power for this universe. I mean, do you see do you see the inconsistency, right? Total inconsistency there. So he entertains things he cannot see. He says they're plausible, it could be there, it could exist. So he jumps into atheism. He believes in all of these hypothetical situations that a God may exist out there and so forth, but, you know, Dhul-Qarnayn and Gog and Magog, you know, existing in beneath the earth somewhere, oh no, that's just not possible. No, God simply loses all of his credibility and powers there. Yes, God has got powers to create the earth, the universe, you know, he's got the power to sustain all of the beings, he's got the power to bring non-life to life, but, you know, having a few beings embedded in the earth somewhere, oh no, that's just not possible now. I mean, look at the logic of these ex-Muslims. And then in the end, he goes on to talk about, have a listen.
My personality, my friends, you know, everything was Islam to me. So this was a huge loss, you know, losing God. And some people want to know what I believe now. I personally don't.
Okay, so,
you know, it doesn't answer dua, doesn't, like, if you just look at the state of the world today, all the suffering and all the pain, it does not look like there's any God out there that cares for us, that's looking out for us. And in fact, that's what I believe, that if there is a creator, either he doesn't know about us or he doesn't care about us, and he's just letting all these things happen. And which is why I'm an atheist, because I don't believe that there is a God. But if there is a creator out there, I mean, maybe he has no personality, maybe it's just like a force, a power, you know.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, he talks about, you know, suffering, and you can watch my video below and I answer the question on suffering. He says something like, oh, believing in the God of Islam, believing in religion, believing in Allah. He doesn't really care about us because there's so much suffering in the world. But then he jumps into atheism, yet atheism shows absolutely no care or concern for suffering. I mean, if you, for example, if you are a pedophile, you rape about 100 kids, you never get caught by the police prosecution officers, you never go through court, you never go through jail, you basically get away with your crime. If you die, you become a worm, and you basically get away with it, your crime. So where is the justice in atheism? See, in Islam, we believe that on the Day of Judgment, no matter how much you conceal your evil deeds and get away with crime, Allah will call you for account on the Day of Judgment, where you'll be given either heaven or hell for your bad deeds and for your good rewards. So Islam is the only mechanism that could give true justice, whereas your atheism doesn't give you justice. So when you turn around and say, oh, there's so much suffering in the world, well, duh. It's not paradise. It's part of turmoil, test. That's what it is. I mean, you can't expect to have paradise here, or else evil people are going to have paradise here too. Is that what you want? So there is a different plan. If you want to do good, then you got to do it here so you can get rewarded in the next life. If you're going to do evil, then God writes it down. He doesn't simply just sit there and watch. No, everything is being recorded, and on that day, He's going to pay you for what you've done. So exactly where is the justice gone wrong here? This is pure justice and pure proof that God exists and He does love and care about us. That's why He constantly sends us warners, messengers to guide humanity to the truth. If He didn't care about us, then He wouldn't send them now, would He? I'll finish off with what Brother Asadullah Ali said. This sort of relates to what the atheists say about, God not caring about us. This is what an atheist says. He says, we're all just a bunch of purposeless matter waiting to be rearranged. We are nothing special on this tiny rock in the middle of nowhere. And of course, when Stephen Hawkins died, Muslims refused to say R.I.P., rest in peace to Hawkins. An atheist in response says, what a bunch of extremists who don't acknowledge how awesome a human being Hawkins was. So notice, there's nothing special about us being on this tiny rock. We're purposeless, stuck in absolutely nowhere. But then when it comes to people like Hawkins, with suddenly extraordinary, awesome people who've got purpose and so forth. Amazing. Here's another great one from Asadullah Ali. Remember the ex-Muslim says, your prayers don't get answered in Islam. This is what an atheist says. Your prayers for Syria are worthless because religion and God are man-made. And this is the response. Yes, I'm sure you're helping so much better by demeaning the Syrians' religious beliefs. They're only a means of hope and comfort. If we just sent them copies of the God delusion, I'm sure their secular dictator would immediately stop slaughtering them and embrace the fruits of your online meme. So, in other words, we will finish off by saying, why doesn't Allah answer the prayers? Some of the knowledge comes from Islamic jurisprudence that Allah answers the prayers of sincere people. For example, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, be aware of the one who makes a dua against someone who has oppressed him, and Allah answers it severely. So this shows that when a person is in really dire need and he makes dua to Allah, this is when Allah answers the most. So the Prophet Muhammad said, warned anyone against those who are oppressing someone, because if that person that is being oppressed makes a dua, that could be answered straight away by Allah. So the Prophet warned. And what does this signify? This signifies that Allah is after sincerity. There are many people in the world that they only run to Allah when they're in need. And so Allah looks at sincerity and for why Allah may not answer a majority of the people's du'as. There's other narrations and Islamic literature that says that if your du'as do not get accepted in this world, it just means that it will be accepted in the hereafter. So the less you get in this world, the more you will get in the hereafter, and we are told to be patient. And of course there are du'as that do get answered, but it's interesting because when du'as get answered, does the ex-Muslims say, oh, that just proves Allah? No, they don't. They say, oh, that was just a coincidence. So it seems you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Anyway, thank you for listening to another episode of Debunking and Refuting These Liars, and I hope Allah guides those who are sincere in the hearts. And I don't believe that this person was ever sincere in his heart. I believe that if he was sincere in his heart, he would have truly grasped and tried to look for answers instead of reading a few material online and then desperately concluding Islam is false. I think they have other evil desires and intentions, other worldly desires, and that is just too tempting, whether it's sex, drugs, alcohol, whether it's intermingling with other women. Being an ex-Muslim is a lifestyle, man, so maybe they just wanted a different lifestyle and they weren't really sincere in their faith. So who knows?